Greetings, Commanders. After multiple days of sea trials, the Python Mk2 anti-Xeno builds have finally reached a state where we are comfortable putting them out for a broader and general recommendation. Now, this video has a bit of theory up front. If you're interested in that, feel free to follow along. Then we'll get into the demos where we showcase two of the three builds. The third build, the Spires build, we don't showcase because it's kind of not that special, honestly, and Spires are easy, so feel free to try it out for yourself. And finally, bring it to a close. If all you want is the build, well, or rather the builds, there's a link to our website where they are explained in detail, both in terms of the components, the file groups, pip configuration, and how to use them. Unfortunately, at the time of this video, EDSY still doesn't have the Python Mk2 listed, so it's a manual rendition of what the configuration of the ship is, but it works, and we tested it extensively, so it's the best we got. As EDSY brings the Python Mk2 in its list of available ships, we will add the configuration in the description of the video below. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk a little bit about what the free builds for the Python Mk2 that we came up are. So there's three of them. There's the TitanBomber version 3.0 A, B, and C, which is designed to bomb the vents and do as much thermal core damage as possible with serious anti-Xeno missile racks. There's the TitanKiller version 3.0 F, which is the fighter version, the space superiority fighter intended for fighting escorts and providing cover in Titan space to bombers. And then finally, covered by my microphone, is what we're calling the Oreo Snacker, an intermediate, quite effective anti-Orpheus build intended for use at Thargoid Spire sites. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to, I'll get my microphone back. When it comes to Titan space builds are exceptionally difficult to set up, and even more so for a ship that has very tight internals like the Python Mk2, and even more so for ships that are inherently designed as shield tanks, having 6 utilities like the Python Mk2. And even more so for ships that have so many big guns like the Python Mk2 has, coupled with an actually pretty small power plant of class 6 and a pretty small power distributor of class 6. So this ship made us sweat with regards to trying and figuring out something that actually works at dealing better damage than existing builds, or otherwise being more functional than existing builds, while at the same time managing to stay, while its shields are charging, below the 20% threshold that is essential for survivability in Titan space. But we managed, and we've tested them extensively, and they work pretty well. And I'm happy to say that the TitanBomber version of the Python Mk2 is probably the best vent and thermal core bomber that we have on offer right now. It is superior to the crate in that it combines the maneuverability of the Mamba, actually exceeds the maneuverability of the Mamba in certain ways, with the damage of a crate Mk2, and in fact it exceeds the damage of a crate Mk2 in certain ways. So it is a fantastic bomber, which I think we will see increasingly present on the battlefield. If you couple that with the Super Cruise Overcharge additional control that the Python Mk2 has, it makes for a fantastic option when it comes to striking Titan Haddad, which, because of its distance, is the prime candidate for the Super Cruise Overcharge type of ships. That being said, it is not that far behind the crate as far as Titan space bombers are concerned. So if you only have a Titan space crate, I wouldn't suggest to go out and spend ARX or real money to specifically get this ship at this time, because it's almost as good as a crate Actually, the Crate Mark II is almost as good as the Python Mark II. There's too many marks. It's getting confusing explaining all the ships. But anyway, the Crate Mark II is almost as good as Python Mark II or what it does. If you're doing like damage in a group anyway, it's not going to make all that difference. So don't go and buy the Python Mark II just for a slightly better bomber. I don't think it's worth it. Now, when it comes to a space superiority fighter, the TitanKiller version 3.0F, that's where I personally think the Python Mark II really, really shines. Like the large gimbal enhanced Xeno, anti-Xeno multi-cannons are almost, it almost looks like they're designed for this ship. They have minimal power grid, minimal heat generation. They hit pretty hard. They're just perfect for the Python Mark II. And this ship with 4 of those packs a real punch while being extremely maneuverable and actually have a really good amount of tank, and we'll get to that in a moment. So personally, the TitanKiller version 3.0F, the fighter version of the Python Mark II, is my personal favorite. Not only it's a fantastic escort for Titan space combat, but it's also able to do quite a bit of damage to a thermal core in its own right. The one thing that it is not able to do, at least not in the configuration that we created, it's not able to bomb the thermal vents, but that's not what it's designed to do. Like if you want to modify it to be able to do that, you can. Just know what you're getting yourself into. But that's the second build. And then the Spire Hunter version is a fantastic intermediate ship, equipping the Python Mark II with 3 large shards, which are engineered to resist the anti-guardian field effect, removes the worry of having your weapons damaged while fighting Orphuses, and allows for even less experienced commanders in less organized instances to hunt pretty much any Orphus inbound or outbound, and consequently increase the credit generation at Spire sites by a significant amount, while also being quite a bit of fun. And shards are excellent at wrecking shields of Orphuses and are pretty good at doing damage to Orphuses themselves, their hulls. So excellent weapon, excellent configuration, something I personally would recommend for most commanders who are not at the wing anacondas with NPCs level, which is the extreme level of like organization of Spire sites, to try. So let's get into these builds and let's talk a little bit about how we have set them up. Let's start with the A variant of the TitanBomber version 3.0. This is the solo version. This is intended to be used alone or in an uncoordinated group slash wing of commanders. Its signature weapons are the 4 large fixed Cirrus anti-Xeno missile racks, coupled with a small gimbaled beam laser, long range with thermal vent, and obviously, since it's meant to bomb thermal vents, a medium nanite torpedo. This configuration is pretty power grid hungry, and in order for it to fit with a low emissions grade 5 monstered, which is realistically the highest we can go while staying within the thermal envelope that this ship requires, it forces a degree of compromises. The most notable compromise is that we have to go down to 6D in terms of class of shields to be able to fit within that thermal envelope and power grid envelope. However, with the 3 shield boosters that we can kit, 2 of which are G5 and 1 of which is grade 1, we can get away with a pretty good amount of shields. I've listed here at 832, but with this configuration it actually goes higher, and on 3 shields this should breed somewhere in the 950 range or 970 range. So not completely lacking tank, while also having pretty good mobility and a very significant amount of thermal core damage. Another compromise we have to make to this ship to make it fit within the thermal envelope that we described is we have to go with clean drives, not the more standard and traditional dirty drives. It is critical to this build to use clean drives. Otherwise, dirty drives will run your ship too hot and get you heat detected, get you shot at, and your day will be ruined. So don't do that. An option, or like several options that you have with regards to this build, is you can choose to go with military grade armor instead of lightweight. The ship does have the sort of speed and maneuverability headroom to do that. However, I personally find that with 1.7 thousand hull, in addition to a reasonably decent shield, any additional tank is kind of wasted, and the loss of speed that you get from kitting military grade armor, to me personally, it's not worth it. To a lot of other commanders, it might be. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't go mil grade. I'm saying I personally wouldn't, but it's a choice, and it's not a choice that's going to affect the thermal profile nor the key characteristics of a ship. So you're welcome to slot in a mil grade armor here if you want. It also so happens that the armor lightweight you get for free results in a ship that has a very low rebuy. If you purchase a mil grade armor, which is comparatively expensive, the rebuy of the ship goes up very significantly. Just be aware. Not that credits are an issue in this game, not with spire sites anymore, but something to be aware. The power plant we talked about, this is realistically the highest grade efficiency we can go while staying with this thermal envelope. Thrusters we talked about, frameshift drive, the ship comes equipped with a 5A super cruise overcharge, which is great. Life support is lightweight engineering, which is standard. The power distributor is a 6A charge enhanced 5 super conduits, which is standard, and the sensors are long range, which is also standard. For utilities, we have a Cirrus heatsink, which is a pre-engineered version of heatsinks which are available at Cirrus megaships. A caustic sink launcher with ammo capacity 1 engineering, which is available at Ramta. Farward pulse neutralizer, which otherwise you're not going anywhere near a Titan. You gotta have this. And then this is the combination of shield boosters I was referencing earlier, which allows you to stay within the thermal envelope of the power grid with the hatch, FSD, and AFMU turned off. You may want to use the AFMU in an emergency. If you want to do that, retract your hard points, turn it on, repair what you need, which generally is the nanite torpedo, which is a priority repair, because if that malfunctions, then it kind of defeats the purpose of using the bomber. So make sure this stays at 100%. If it's not, repair it. With those three modules off, this build runs exactly at 99.5% power capacity. So there is no headroom whatsoever to add anything additional to it as far as any additional power grid requirements or anything of the sort. We talked about the choice that you had with armor. There is another choice that if you want to go with 3 shield boosters of grade 5 instead of just 2, so if you want to essentially upgrade this heavy duty 1 to a heavy duty 5 and constantly get an even slightly higher level of shield, you will have to downgrade the gimbaled version of the small beam to a turreted version, which is even less power grid hungry, and it is the one that I actually use in the demo that we'll get into a minute. But in hindsight, a gimbaled version with the heavy duty 1 is a better option, because the gimbaled cools you a lot better than the turreted version. It is just a better option in terms of utility. Furthermore, and you may have noticed this, we are putting a small gimbaled beam laser in the medium slot. This is not a mistake. Again, this is by design, and it's driven by the fact that medium beam would put you above the power grid threshold. So it doesn't fit. You'd have to compromise on the shield boosters, you'd have to compromise on other things. But because the beam laser here is just here as a utility, it's not here to really do any damage or have any significant means of doing anything to ships that isn't its cooling effect on your ship, a small gimbal beam laser works just fine. Hence our recommendation here. As I mentioned, and as we'll show in a moment, this is an excellent bomber. It combines the mobility of the Mamba. It boosts somewhat lower than the Mamba, but not that much lower. The Mamba, I think, does about 540, I want to say. The Python Mk2 does just above 500 in this configuration, while also having the firepower of a crate, actually even better, like with 4 large Sears missile racks. So I've personally had a great time with it. It is somewhat less of a comfort ship than the crate. The crate has power for the ages. The crate has distributor energy for the ages. The crate is an extremely easy fit. You don't have to G5 everything or kind of worry about 1% power capacity to make the crate work. The crate kind of just works in most situations and configurations. And because the crate also runs shieldless, while having quite a bit of tank, granted by its much better utilities, the crate ensures that you don't need to worry about system capacitor when charging shields or anything of the like. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, which I think actually works extremely well, it's extremely interesting with the ship, is with the low draw experimental on the shields, on all shields that we did, both on the shields of this ship, but also on the prismatics that we'll talk about in the fighter, it is possible to charge the shields with a single pip in sys, in system of the charge enhanced superconduits power distributor. This is very handy because it allows you to forget about your system capacitor for the most part, because you know that it's never going to effectively drain. Having your system capacitor drain would mean that you wouldn't be able to fire heat sinks or caustic sink launchers when you might need them, which is incredibly annoying. You don't want that. So being able to run 1-for-1 pips, one pip in sys, 4 pip in web, and 4 pips in eng and 1 pip in web, while then bombing, is extremely convenient. So this is a very, very nice quality of life configuration of the ship that, again, just works, even though it has been incredibly difficult to make it work. So again, try it. It's a bomber, it's not a fighter, so it's comparatively squishy, as we made some compromise with regards to the shielding, but it does what it needs to do very well, and it's actually quite a bit of fun and a beauty to fly. So try it and let us know what your experience is in the comments below. Oh, and one final thing which I didn't mention is it actually has quite a bit of tank, both in terms of hull and module protection, if the shields do drop. So you will not get instantly vaporized the moment you lose your shields, which will happen eventually, sooner or later. You still have more than enough capacity to get yourself out of trouble, into the asteroid field, to a safe spot, or otherwise lose your tails as you're getting to safety, while having your ship not getting completely wrecked because of lack of hull tank. You have 1.7k of hull tank at 70 armor rating, which is very high, by the way, for a combat ship. So most of the time, you will be okay. So there's 2 variants of the ship, which are predictably going to be less popular because they are wing-oriented variants, which, however, if you are willing and have a few friends or are willing to wing up with other people in open instance and the like, work even better. And as you may have guessed, also based on our prior builds about relying on shield, the key factor of these builds is the addition of the concordance sequence experimental effect. Concordance sequence is an incredibly effective special effect which multiplies the recharge rate of any friendly shields that are hit in your wing by a factor of 10 without increasing distributor draw and without increasing heat generation. You will see your shields just magically increase their recharge rate and go back to 100 in basically no time. The catch, or rather the few catches associated with concordance sequence, are: number one, It only works in a wing. You have to be in a wing to be able to apply this effect. You cannot just target a random commander in the instance and hit them with concsec. It will do nothing. Catch number one. Catch number two, it only works when shields are regenerating. And shields stop regenerating when you take damage. And there's a 3-second delay between when you take damage and when shields start recharging again. And consequently, there's a 3-second delay until when the concordant sequence effect kicks in. If you are constantly under fire, concordant sequence will not kick in at all and it will not help you. However, if you manage to catch even a brief break, then the effect will kick in and it will magically restore your shields in practically no time. So we at the Xeno Strike Force are big fans of concordant sequence as we fly in wings a lot, and the effectiveness and survivability of these builds, especially of fighter builds that are meant to actually take damage, increases dramatically with a well-used concordant sequence effect. So this B version of the TitanBomber version 3 loses the thermal vent experimental and consequently adds a serious heatsink in order to be able to have heatsink coverage both for the vent bombing and for the thermal core strike phase of a cycle, while being able to support other ships in their wing with a concordant sequence effect. The downside of this build is that it is heatsink synthesis intensive, as in you will need to synthesize ammo for your heatsinks, which is dirt cheap, but it's still annoying, every cycle twice to rearm your heatsinks for both the vent bombing cycle and for the thermal core cycle. This is generally not an issue because, again, the materials are dirt cheap and you can carry 150 of these synths. But for whatever reason, people think it's annoying and don't like to do it and constantly feel that a sort of build being sync synthesis intensive is undesirable. Personally, I could care less. I will spam heatsink synthesis all day long, and every now and then we'll have a trip to a materials broker to restock, which is not that often at all. So I personally would encourage you to just try it because it's extremely effective and the synthesis is nowhere nearly as painful as people might think it to be. The partner version of this ship is the C version, which sacrifices instead the torpedo to mount a small gimbaled beam laser. And this ship essentially comes with both the concordant sequence and the thermal vent beam laser, which allows it to stay cold without pretty much using heat sinks at all, or very minimally, more as like an emergency measure than as actually something you're expected to do. But obviously, the C version relies on the B version to actually do the vent bombing proper. The C will add itself to the actual thermal core strike, but the C version, because it lacks a torpedo, has no ability to actually bomb the vents themselves. So in practice, what you'll want to do in a wing of 4 of these is to have 2 of the B versions, because you never know in case one of the bombers goes down or needs to repair, the other one can take over, and two of the C versions, and that is an incredibly effective bomber wing, which will more than zero the thermal core on any given cycle, and is candidly all you need to hold an entire Titan instance as far as thermal vent and thermal core damage is concerned. So think about it this way: if you're flying alone, then, or in some kind of disorganized instance, bring the 3.0A variant of the Python Mk2 bomber. If you're flying with friends, consider bringing 2 of the B version and 2 of the C version. And that will make for the best wing overall and for an incredibly effective experience with concordant sequence effects supporting each other. So that's as much for the bomber. Now let's talk about the fighter. The fighter is my personal favorite when it comes to the Python Mk2 Titan Space builds. It's built around the large gimbaled enhanced anti-xeno multi-cannons. Note that it is not the pre-engineered so-called Azimuth versions. The ones that we're talking about are the ones that can be bought just for credits and do not require any kind of unlock or materials purchase. You just buy these for credits at Rescue Megaships. The reason we're using these and not the ADSYs is because they are far less power grid hungry and significantly lower heat generation than their pre-engineered counterparts. Which means that you can use a single medium gimbal beam laser, in this case, yes, it's medium, this one is by design also, to cool them off permanently. And then you also have space for a turreted pulse laser with concordant sequence, which is all you need to apply the concordant sequence effect to friendlies in your wing. Now, because these weapons are so much less power grid hungry, we are able on the fighter to do some very desirable things. We're able to drop the experimental on the power plant to thermal spread, although this is not strictly required. Like if you want to use the monstered version of the power plant that you have lying around from the bomber, that's fine. Keep monstered. Thermal spread makes it better, but it's not a make or break of the build as a whole. More interestingly and more desirably, we are able to fit a prismatic shield, if you have one, because it's a power play module. So not everybody's necessarily going to have one lying around. But if you do, you can kit a Class 6A prismatic shield, also engineered for enhanced low power and low draw. And this with 2 shield boosters that can also be upgraded if you want to 0D, as you have the power to do it. Again, you can use the E version, and in fact in my demo I think I used the E version because I had them lying around from the bomber build, and honestly I couldn't be bothered to engineer 2 additional shield boosters just for additional 50 hit points of shield strength, which is what this gives you. Again, you can mount the D-rated shield boosters. The power budget of this build allows you to do it. Obviously, you need an enhanced Xeno scanner on a fighter because you need to be able to sub-target hearts of interceptors and hit them with the gimbals, otherwise it's practically impossible. So you're flying with a single heatsink, which doesn't matter because you have a very powerful beam laser to keep you cool, an enhanced Xeno scanner, which is necessary, and the caustic sync launcher and TPNs that are basically required, plus 2 shield boosters, which coupled with prismatic give you somewhere in a range of 1200 to 1300 hit points of your shield. That's before resistances, which is a pretty fair amount for an agile medium ship like the Python Mk2, and especially it's a really good amount for a ship that runs at below 20% heat while under thrust and while its shields are charging. So this fighter just works like chef kiss, like really, really well. It's running as cold as ice. It can stay cold indefinitely while firing its guns. It does very significant damage to all of its intended targets, be they scouts, glaives, scythes, interceptors of most variants. It's just good. I've really had a good time. I really enjoyed flying the Python Mk2 in its fighter configuration. I just find that the weapons that we're talking here are the easiest and best ones to fit a ship that has large hardpoints but very low power grid. It's just a match made in heaven. So this is the fighter version. Like all things, there's some variants that you can consider. If you don't have prismatic shields, it is totally fine to use A-rated shields. And if you must, you can use the D-rated shields that the bomber version uses. It's not the end of the world. You lose some tank, but because you have a power budget, you can actually use even better shield boosters. You can go a grade or two higher on the shield boosters if you are using just regular shields or D-class shields instead of the prismatics. There's the same lightweight armor versus middle grade armor dilemma that I mentioned earlier. Again, my personal preference is lightweight, but this is another situation where if you prefer middle grade and are willing to pay the price in terms of speed and maneuverability, you absolutely can do that. The other things are pretty standard and I wouldn't necessarily consider changing, as you do need that kind of tank in case the shields fall. And if you were to replace any of these things with, say, for example, repair input control in grade 3, you're giving up module protection and you're not going to repair much with a grade 3 repair input anyway, so it's not worth it. We've tried to make the ship work as a hull tank. We just couldn't make it reliably work in a way that kind of made any practical sense. Not in a Titan space build. And hence this is what we got here. So this is the fighter. The third build, which is probably the most straightforward one and the one that actually looks more like a normal ship because it's not a Titan space build. It's like it's a Spires build. So this build does not have the same thermal envelope constraints of the previous two ships. So it's a much easier build. It's a much more normal build. It's something that you'll probably be finding yourself using also, for instance, in PvE, you're probably going to be using a ship sort of like this. You can use something like this to also fight in solo type of combat, although I wouldn't use large shards in that case, but story for another day. So the Spire version of the Python Mk2 is built around the large fixed Guardian shard cannons with the anti-Guardian field engineering that Ramta has recently made available, which makes these weapons resistant to the anti-Guardian field that Orthrus's fire at Spire sites at the price of 20% damage, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. Because you're using fixed weapons, I also recommend to go with fixed weapons as far as the beams are concerned. Makes everything kind of easier, and it allows you to actually hit scouts from range, which is something that you generally cannot do with gimbals. So I personally would go with the fixed beams here. If you want to go with gimbals, you can. You have the power budget to do it. You might need to downgrade one of the shield boosters in order to do that, but that's totally fine. Go with gimbals if you'd rather go with gimbals. And you can't be bothered engineering a separate set of fixed beams for the ship. This ship does use a biweave, again, because heat is not a concern, and the increased heat generation from biweaves charging doesn't matter. You're absolutely able to run biweaves, and because of that consideration, you would run biweaves that are reinforced and use fast charge, which is generally what you want to do on biweaves. This configuration is enabled by switching a low emission plant to an armored plant with thermal spread. This obviously gives you a humongously higher power budget to work with, which enables you to power the shards and power the biweave and switch the drives. Well, that's actually not a power grid issue, that's a heat issue, but it essentially allows you to run everything that you need to run in the ship. While you're at it, again, because the heat budget doesn't apply anymore, you should switch to dirty drives with drag drives, experimental, which will result in a much faster ship than the clean drives version, which is a joy to fly and just is one of the most agile ships in the game, together with the Fertile Lance, and is actually just 2 degrees per second slower than the Fertile Lance in terms of pitch rate, but actually even higher than the Fertile Lance in terms of roll and yaw. So it flies great. And with dirty drives, it goes also very, very fast. We are at Spires, so we don't need a forward pulse neutralizer, and rather we replace it with a shutdown field neutralizer, as this protects not only you, but also the friends you have within 3 kilometers from the shutdown field effects that Orthrus still do fire, and that you still do need to pay attention to. An enhanced skin of scanner is not strictly required, but it allows you to understand what Orthrus have shields and whether they re-shield. It provides a lot of situational awareness that at Spires is highly desirable, and so we're going with an enhanced Xeno scanner. There's caustic everywhere at Spire sites, and so having at least 2 caustic sink launchers is basically required. And we're not sad to sacrifice heat sinks to mount these 2. We have 2 thermal vent beams on this ship. We don't really need additional cooling capacity. The shards themselves run very cool. We don't need heat sinks on this build, and so we don't have them. We do have 2 shield boosters because of very, very significant power budget that you have from the armored plant. You're able to mount all the way up to A grade shield boosters. Again, these are not going to make or break the build. So if you just have the E-rated that, for instance, you have lying around from the Bomber, you can absolutely use the E-rated and it's going to be fine. Like, the A-rated have a bit more tank, but it's not make or break of the build as a whole. Finally, in terms of build of weapons that just don't work particularly well on the Python Mk2, and which explain why we didn't build ships with these weapons. Guardian Gauss is too distributor hungry. On the Python Mk2, it would be limited to the same free medium that the 6A charge enhanced superconduit can sustain, and you can make free medium Gauss work so much better on the Crate, the Chief, and the Chali. All of which have much better internals than the Python Mk2 and make for just much better AX ships with Gauss than the Python Mk2. So that's not to say that you cannot use Gauss on the Python Mk2. You can. However, you should just know that there's better alternatives than the Python Mk2 as far as Guardian Gauss is concerned. Another weapon that is also extremely distributor hungry is plasma chargers, including their modified version, regardless of the fact that the original version have or does not have the anti-Guardian field modification. These weapons are way too distributor hungry. They're entirely limited by your distributor, not by your hardpoints. And realistically, the Crate Mk2, which has a much more powerful Class 7 distributor, will be a much better platform for plasma chargers. Furthermore, if you plan to use plasma chargers or modified plasma chargers at Spire sites, you should remember that the Anaconda, with its Class 8 power distributor, exists and is a much, much better platform to use these. So, again, can you use plasma chargers or modified plasma chargers on a Python Mk2? Yes, absolutely. Does it actually make sense to use them, or is it optimal? Definitely not. These weapons are designed for ships with big distributors, like the Crate, like the Conda, and the like. Finally, and this is probably the more on the fence kind of controversial recommendation, is mod shards, modified shard cannons, which are some of the best weapons in the game. These are also quite distributor hungry, and the Crate is already on the limit of feasibility with 4 of these. Adding a 5th to a Python Mk2 would require an experimental weapon stabilizer in a class 3 slot, which would make it even more squishy. If you really want to go with 6, then that would give you major alpha damage and ability to get Cyclops on the spot, but it would require the higher grade class 5 experimental weapon stabilizer in the only slot that accepts it, which is this class 6 slot. And furthermore, you probably would want to run a weapon-focused power distributor at that point, which would turn you into a complete glass cannon, which, while makes for maybe some interesting videos, it does not make for fun or entertaining gameplay for any sustained period of time, as you would die often and frequently and over again. So I personally just wouldn't want to fly Python Mk2 with mod shards in any but the most extreme speed running or meme build type of arrangements. If you want to use mod shards, use the Crate Mk2 or use the Challenger. Both are platforms that I would argue are better platforms for mod shards, especially the Crate Mk2. With that, let's get into the thick of a fight and let's look at some actual live fire demonstrations. In our first demo, we will be trying out the TitanBomber version 3.0a, the solo version of the next generation stealth vent and thermal core bomber. We are at Titan Haddad, in position to bomb away. Let's see how this ship fares. Spoiler, it fares pretty well, as you will see in a moment. It combines the mobility, actually better than the Mamba's mobility, with more firepower than even the crate can muster against the thermal core. So within the constraints of its build, which is incredibly power constrained and is forced to use, well, I have to get going. I was saying it was about forced to use derated shields to stay within its power envelope. It is incredibly mobile and incredibly effective at bombing all the vents, while also doing quite a bit of damage to the core. In fact, probably among the most, if not the most damage of any medium ship, given its 4 serious missile racks, which hit incredibly hard. Oh, we made a friend up there. And this, I think, is the last vent. We just hit 848 vents with great ease, much more so than the crate will be able to do. It's possible to hit the 848 vents in a crate, but it's very difficult. I generally manage like 1 out of 3 times, I want to say. And the thermal core is coming out. So we're not exactly optimal. I kind of was late on firing my initial volley, but it's not too shabby. Stay close so I can get as many volleys as I realistically can on the core. Now this build is squishy, but it's not that squishy. It almost has 1,000 shields with its 307, OE shield boosters. So it's quite effective. And 40% damage. 40% damage, which considering I was late on firing the first volley, is as much, if not better, than the Crate Mark II. Like with significant more consistency at hitting 8 vents on each kind of like vent run. That's 761,000 credits on the very high resistance that Haddad is currently at. Note that this version has a thermal vent beam. It has the largest thermal vent beam that the power configuration of the ship allows, which is a small turreted beam. Anything above it will push it above the 100% threshold. Note this build is running at 99% power consumption with the AFMU, SCO, and cargo hatch off. The good thing about it is even with shield charging, note that even with shield charging, I am running at 18% heat or up to 20% heat. It will not go above 20. And that is one of the defining signatures of Titan space combat. You need ships that run at 20% or below when shields are charging. Charging shields actually contribute a significant amount of heat, and that's the reason, by the way, that we don't use bi-weaves despite their ideal power grid consumption, because the charging of bi-weaves would push this ship over the thermal threshold that it needs to stay under to be able to be a proper stealth bomber. In fact, pretty much anything would push the ship over its thermal threshold. Anything but the 0E boosters that the ship has would push it above the thermal threshold. Again, these are heavy-duty supercapacitor 0E shield boosters. And anything but the small turreted thermal vent beam laser would push it above. Pretty much we've done the very, very, very best we could with the power grid that was available with this ship, and with the overall weapon configuration, which was built around these 4 large serious missile racks. But let's see if we can do another run and see if like previous run wasn't just I don't know, a lucky run or something like that, and see if we can consistently do what we just did before, which is hit 8 vents and do 40% or more. Who knows, maybe we'll be able to do more of this run. We'll see. Again, we kind of made friends here, so I'm gonna try and evade while beginning my run in a second. Make sure I have pips in weapon, because I'm gonna need pips in weapon. Make sure I have my nanite torpedo loaded. My caustic sink should be rearmed any second now, and we should be going on the run pretty much any second now. As vents will open. I know they will open the moment I turn around. There we go. 1, 2, and off we go on boost. Nope, even in a less than ideal run as this one was, I think we'll have enough time to recover and manage to hit 848. One more. Ah, we only got 7 there. Well, that was not an ideal run. Let's see what we can do in terms of damage to the core. Again, we're kind of late on firing. You can start firing the moment the core appears, or even sooner, like, because realistically you're gonna hit it anyway. Pop a heatsink because I am gotten a little too hot, even with my thermal vent beam, because being around the thermal core can actually get you quite spicy. Again, we get 37% on 7 vents, which is, again, very, very remarkable. And let's see if we can take a proper screenshot with the Taurus firing, with shields and whatnot, and what is, like, one of his signature situations with the Fargwick Titan while boosting forward, because that's nicer. Let's see if we can actually remain cold while we're doing it. And that's it. So as you can see, this makes probably for the best bomber in the game, the combination of thermal vent bomber and Titan core thermal damage that he can do, while being reasonably tanky. Like, even with, as you can see, especially if I put pips and sys, so my shields hold better. Like, you can tank a reasonable amount of damage from scouts and turrets, and like, it's not like you're gonna go head to head with Basilisk and start face tanking them in the ship, because you do have only still like about 1,000 in shield health, as you can see here. But you got a pretty good tank in terms of armor wise. You got 1.7k hull. So even if you do lose your shields, you're not gonna kind of blow up instantaneously, and you're still gonna be able to retreat and have enough time to head to the asteroids or head to a safe spot in order to go and rebuild your shields and get going on another run. So this is the Python Mk2 in its bomber configuration. Try it out and let us know in the comments how it works for you. We are arriving at Titan with the new Python Mk2 in the lighter configuration here. The ship is built around 4 of these enhanced gimbaled large anti-xeno multi-cannons. Note, these are the regular version, not the pre-engineered version. The regular version runs much cooler, has a significantly lower power grid requirement, and is basically almost like ideally built for the Python Mk2. Now this is a fighter configuration which, with these weapons, allows us to use a prismatic shield generator, albeit with enhanced low power, low draw configuration, while also running extremely cool. Note how I am under thrust and I'm running at 17% heat. Even with shields charging, which significantly increase the heat of the ship would be running below 20%, which means this is effectively a stealth fighter kind of build. So what is this for? This is to fight interceptors and escorts, generally speaking, in Titan space. So we have a thermal vent beam, which allows it to sort of like grab attention of others while staying cold. In its actual fight configuration, the ship fights on 114. It uses 1 pip to sys, 1 pip to eng, and 4 pips to web. And let's see how effective we are at ruining the day of the Cyclops. Now we generally want to get a scan first and switch to flight assist off while we're at it and open fire. Now we can boost with our vent beam on. We can use the boost And there goes the, if I can aim my gimbals. I'm quite far, so it's doing very little damage due to range. There goes the first heart. I'm gonna do something to speed up the fight that I would not normally do, which is I will actively shoot down the shield. Did it just get hit by its own swarm? It might have. It kind of like ended up skipping the lightning phase, which is nice because again it'll speed up the fight to a degree. And here we go. Note the multi-cannons are actually quite effective at taking that shield down. You gotta be careful not to bump into an asteroid while I'm doing this. And the shield is down. And we have the next heart squarely in our sights. And there you go. No, we take some phasing damage, but the ship is quite tanky. Did I say something about not bumping to asteroids? Even with the bump into the asteroids, note how the shields have held up quite nicely. The fighter configuration of the ship has a pretty generous 1200 shields, which is more than enough to actively do what we're trying to do here. The one thing about this build, and we'll talk about that in a moment once this collapse goes down, is that the shields recharge very slowly. So it's equipped with a concordant sequence pulse turret, as it is intended to be used in a wing configuration to massively increase the recharge rate of the shields. So this is ideally a wing fighter that works best when actively used in a wing. We should be getting the exert as soon as our multi-cannons reload. There we go, final heart. And the heart, and it's down. I can actually take it down before the shield goes up. We might, as for some reason it's delayed. And there you go. Note that most of the damage we've taken is from the asteroid impact that we had during the fight. And this is just with one ship. This ship is exceptionally good at dealing with firewood scouts, by the way. Not at that range, we need to get closer. But as an escort, its primary duty is to deal with glaives, interceptors, and scouts. So it kind of needs to be able to do that, and it does so really, really excellently. Now we've got ourselves get a little hot because we are not targeting the scout interceptor, so this is when we want to use a heatsink to actually get our heat to stay in a manageable level. It's difficult to hit scout consistently with a thermal vent beam, so unless you're pretty close, it's kind of a choice on whether you want to use a heatsink for that purpose or rely on your beam. In this case, we were quite effective at doing it. Now, I don't know how this ship is going to fare against an Orpheus. Probably not particularly well, even though it is able to neutralize the shutdown field that it triggers. We'll give it a try. I kind of saw there was an Orpheus coming our way down there. Again, probably going to hit a asteroid at this point in time. Let's see if we can find that Orpheus that was just below there. I let my heat get too high with the boost. I was trying to get a beam on target, but I wasn't quite successful. The ship boosts to 501, as you've seen. And boosting is something you should not do unless you have coverage from your thermal vent beam, which in this case we do, so we can do that. Let's see how we actually fare against an Orpheus in Titan space. You wouldn't normally engage Orpheus in Titan space, but since we're kind of running an experimental build here, we might as well see how it does. Note I'm switching pips back to weapon. And I'm actually emptying my clip because timing will matter. So I'm going to get for the full reload and have my guns full. And here's our friendly Oreo. And opening fight. Neutralizing. There. And we keep shooting.
No, we don't have any Guardian modules of any kind, so the anti-Guardian field effect that it fires with bow is omnipresent, and the target Titan doesn't absolutely do anything to us. Alright, shield is almost down. Shield is down. No, multi-cannons are not as effective as missiles against fortresses, but we might be able to take one down solo regardless, because these large guns actually do a reasonable amount of damage. We'll see. It's a race against time before it actually jumps out, so it's a toss-up on whether we're able to do it. Alright, 50%. It's gonna be close. There you go, it's jumping out. I don't think we're gonna be able to get it. It jumped out. But anyway, we did more than half of its overarching damage just with a single solo ship, which again is not designed to hunt Orphuses, which is not too shabby. So this is the Titan fighter for you. As I mentioned, it's running a prismatic shield generator, which has a pretty reasonable 1200 shield health. To go with incredibly cold running ship, which is how Titan spaceships need to run. The one thing we didn't see in this ship in this demo, because I was running alone, is we actually have a concordant sequence pulse laser. The concordant sequence pulse laser is designed to, which by the way isn't firing because I think my turrets are set to fire at some weird configuration. Fire it well, forward fire. There you go. This is gonna boost the regeneration of the shields of any ally in a wing that you hit by a factor of 10 without any increase in its heat generation or its distro consumption. It is an incredibly powerful effect, noting that it is interrupted by taking damage, as in shield recharge is interrupted by taking damage. So it only really works if your ally manage to catch a break. It's actually easier than it sounds to catch a break in between attack runs or in between different activities that fighters rely upon. So this is it. I personally find this to be the best build for the Crate Mark II as far as Titan Space is concerned. It just works incredibly well with these guns. They seem almost custom built for the power grid starved and internal limited version of the Titan Mark II. The reason, by the way, why you don't see this fighter equipped with shards is that shards run too hot on a shielded build, which the Titan Mark II is, and consequently the Titan Mark II does not make for a good shard platform, even with the anti-Guardian field modifier, which is now applicable to those weapons. The Crate is a much better weapon with its larger power plant, its larger power distributor, and its much better internals that let it run in a much tankier fashion while staying colder and powering those weapons. And the difference between 3 large and 1 medium shards, which is what the Crate runs, and 4 large shards, which is what the Titan runs, isn't that massive. Now, where the shards actually work is on Spire Sights build, which is why the third build that we're proposing is armored power plant that actually kits shards, but that is intended for use at Spire Sights, not at Fargoid Titans. With that, this concludes the section of... actually, no, we have a glaive here. Let's see if we can engage a glaive and see how the ship fares against the glaive. Glaive have a nasty... Actually, that's a scythe, but the kind of same thing holds. Scythes and glaives have a nasty habit of wrecking shields pretty significantly. So we'll see if we're able to take it out before it actually does even damage, or by shifting 4 pips to Sys if we're able to tank its lightning, which is quite important because we don't want to lose our shields, even if we're less than 80% charge at this point in time. Let's see if we can get its attention. Sounds like pretty oblivious to what we're doing right now, but it doesn't matter. Like, all right, hitting it. Oh, it's jumping out. Never mind, we missed it. Let's see if we can find another glaive while we empty the clip of this gun for the sake of science. And there you go. At the time you actually want a glaive, or scythe. You don't actually find it. Let's see what we got here. Something's jumping in, but this one looks pretty big to be a scythe, so this is going to be an interceptor of some kind. Let's see if we can find one of those little buggers. Now I deliberately tagged the Titan so that it spawned additional patrols. There you go. And that, now that those are scouts. Those are launching from the scouts tube. Okay, let's see if we can tap it again. Annoy enough for it to launch more escorts. This is one of those rare occasions where we actually want more escorts. Let's see what we got over there. So remote sensor signals. Note that this is not meant as a bomber build, but those multi-cannons do actually quite a bit of damage to the thermal core, so if you want to join in on a bombing run, it is something that you absolutely can do. No glaives to be seen right now. That's another Orpheus up there. Alright, well, sounds like glaives don't want to show up for a little demo. But it's fine. Like, these ships do actually very, very decently against glaives. Multi-cannons do very significant damage and hit pretty consistently against glaives. They are arguably, together with plasma charges, the best weapons actually to use against glaives. So, I can't quite show you because glaives are kind of like evading and eluding me in this data, but I'll ask you to take my word for it that these builds do very well against glaive, especially if you happen to have more than one of these build in the instance, which you generally would if you're flying escorts in Titan space as a wing. You would find that they do incredibly well. Furthermore, I do believe that lightning does not interrupt the concordance sequence effect. I may be wrong about that one. Actually, it'd be interesting if anybody has tried it in the comments of the video and can talk about whether concordance sequence is interrupted by lightning. Lightning doesn't interrupt synthesis, for example, so it's a bit of a weird attack in that it doesn't count as a regular attack for the purpose of interrupting things, but are normally interrupted by regular attacks, and consequently it is hard to know whether it would actually interrupt the concordance sequence effect, and it's not something that we commonly test. But try it out, let me know in the comments whether it actually interrupts concordance sequence in a wing or not. Other than that, this is the new Python Mk2 in its fighter configuration, which is probably my preferred build for this ship. It works incredibly well and is actually a ton of fun to fly. In closing, I would like to acknowledge fellow commanders of Xeno Strike Force that were instrumental in designing these builds. And Commander Chao in particular had the idea to use D-rated shields on the bomber, which is really the key insight that made the build work as a whole, which otherwise we were kind of experimenting with like the most dysfunctional things before we kind of had that intuition from Chao to go that route. I'd like to thank Commander Koben for all the math he did to help analyze and study different configurations of different ships and what fit and what didn't in a situation where Elite Dangerous Shipyard is not available. So we had to do these by hand, and Commander's Koben's spreadsheets have helped immensely put some math behind the thoughts of what could and couldn't work. So that accelerated and helped the build process a lot. Commander Malkrie created the website page with all the build information that made it accessible to commanders from the world over. And all other commanders of Xeno Strike Force, including Commander Shadow, Commander Mediocre, have provided great thought partnership, great ideas, and were just instrumental altogether in creating these builds. These builds really are created by the Xeno Strike Force as a whole and their collective experience in fighting in Titan space and at Spire sites, which is something that we've been doing for over a year now. So we have some experience with that. What I will say is the ship is new. The ship has been out for less than a week. We spent a good amount of time with it. We've tested these builds extensively firsthand,
and we can say pretty confidently that they work and they work well. So you're not going to be disappointed by these builds, we think. However, it is still a new ship. So unlike the crate, where we spent a year and a half optimizing to the nth degree, and we can say that we have a very, very well sort of tried and tested build for the TitanBomber crate, it may be possible that the Python Mk2 still has some aspects that are rough around the edges, and consequently we may improve it still over time as we go. But at this point, we're confident that the builds that we put out here form a good basis for something that works for its intended purpose, which is Titan bombing of vents and thermal cores for the first build, space superiority in Titan space, which is the second build, and spire combat, which is the third. That being said, please send us your feedback. We love to hear from you and your experience with these ships and how these been working or what you've been tried differently. Write the comments below. We read all of them. We respond to all the ones that we can realistically, and engage with the community as much as possible, as it really takes a village to make the most out of AX configuration, especially for ones that are so tight on a power and distributed type basis. So glory to mankind. Enjoy these ships. Let us know how it goes. Commander Meccan over and out.